Welcome to Show Your Priors, Episode 7. We're your co-hosts, Michael Nichols and Jason Thompson. A prior is the belief you bring before the argument starts, and every week we show you ours. On tonight's show, Stanford has released its annual AI Index report. Will China surpass the US in AI supremacy? We'll find out. SPACs were the post-COVID investment darlings. They crashed and burned at an astonishing rate, but now they're back? And lastly, Joseph Stalin. That's right. We're going to look into the Great Terror and execution and see how that might relate to business strategy. But first, let's get into this week's headlines. Allbirds was a once beloved wool sneaker brand. It just sold its shoe business for $39 million and relaunched as an AI compute company, causing its stock to shoot up 880% in a single day. Meanwhile, Michael Burry, the big short investor, is going long on beaten down SaaS stalwarts like Adobe, Veeva, and Autodesk. The through line here, the market is simultaneously bidding up anything with AI in the name and punishing solid software businesses for being insufficiently futuristic. Michael, what do you think about these SaaS futures or the SaaS stocks that Burry is buying?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot because on social media, anytime AI is mentioned, you get sort of like this manic depressive dichotomy where one side is just all hype. SaaS is dead. And every company that does SaaS, us vibe coders are coming for you. Right? So that's the one side. The other side, we talked about a little bit as well. They're more the doomers. But then there are people like Burry, right, who don't believe either side. And that's somebody probably looking at the priors, thinking about what's the probability that a successful business model over the long term will fail.
Yeah.
And they're gonna place their bet on ones that have shown resilience. And SaaS has shown some resilience, right? It's been punished by hype. And I think what people are struggling with is how to price it. And we talked a lot about vertical AI, and I did some research this week on it to think about how it and SaaS, on the one hand, they could be threatened, on the other hand, not. So the truth is always somewhere in between. So the ones that are threatened probably are like tooling, just thin wrappers, right? That AI could probably do. You could probably vibe code. But if it's mapping out a deep workflow, a vertical workflow, a SaaS that's covering that, like a Salesforce, or doing something that's institutional like PayPal with distribution system that's incredible, right? I mean, how many users do they have? It's integrated even into, banking apps, et cetera, sometimes, right? It depends on where you are in the world. But those are the fundamentals. That's what Warren Buffett used to always talk about.
Yeah.
And there's always the old school philosophy, buy low. If he's correct about the priors and these companies are more resilient, he's going to get rewarded.
Let me talk about the other side of the coin just real quick. Allbirds is renaming itself as New Bird AI, I think is what it's called. And it's going to be selling basically graphics card compute. It's just going to be renting compute is its business model now. And it's going to raise $50 million in order to do that. But now let's think about all these competing companies with a lot more money to spend. It's really hard to get these components right now because they're in such high demand. I don't know that anybody really thinks that Allbirds is actually going to get to the point where it sells compute. I think it's 100% just a play to get the stock to go up so that a few people who are in the know are going to make the money before, the bottom falls out of it, right? And the bottom falling out of it then flips to Michael Burry's position, where he's now betting on the stocks that are undervalued because of shit like this. I mean,
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot like flipping a home, but not actually doing anything with the foundation, just slapping some paint on it.
yeah, calling it
And
AI
they call
foundation.
that, yeah, they call that the next greater fool theory. So whenever a stock goes up like this, where there may not be any fundamentals at all,
Yeah,
all you need to do is find a next greater fool to sell it to.
that's right.
So that's often the bet. We're going to probably return to the next greater fool theory later with another topic, but I think it's a good example of an analogy with the dot-com bubble. The dot-com caused like a premium to go onto your stock, right?
Yeah,
And it's the same with AI. Even if the company presumably had no capabilities before, We don't even know if they have the capabilities now. That's what you're saying. And really, is it just a thin wrapper around the word AI? We don't know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would bet against it.
Their stock has not come back down to where it was, but it has started to come back down just a little bit. It'll probably take some time, but it'll come back down. But it's just a pump and dump game these days. You see it everywhere. All right, let's move on to the next story. This one harkens back to 1983. War Games asked a simple question, and that's what happens when you take humans out of the loop in warfare. The answer, we got courtesy of Matthew Broderick and an AI named Joshua, was almost global thermonuclear war.
Yeah.
Now the U.S. Air Force has introduced something called War Matrix, which is a real operational AI wargaming system. They're explicitly designing it as human-machine teaming tool. So hopefully they learned a lesson from Hollywood and won't be repeating the same mistake.
Yeah, we talked about Claude Mythos last week, right? Where we're talking about this ability to point out zero-day errors. You wonder if that's related, right? Do you really want to trust AI in national security environments? But maybe AI is actually really good for this application because in the end, if you're using like LLMs or some kind of technology that's stochastic, meaning probabilistic, well, war games are probabilistic. The only question with that movie was in war games, Joshua was trained to never lose. The question is, how are you training it? Are you doing it safely? Is it clear that it's only scenarios? Are they realistic scenarios? And typically with AI, if the military is giving it better and better intelligence and data, those scenarios will get richer. And I like what the company said. Hey, we're trying to be transparent. We're just trying to point out the trade-offs that you have when you pursue any strategy. So that sounds like not a bad application of AI, provided that it's safe, provided that it's secure, since it's national security.
I would hope that it's not actually hooked up to like the launch codes and has the physical capability of doing that.
Yeah.
And this harkens back a little bit to our conversation with Anthropic and them declining the Department of War's terms, which those terms were specifically removal of man in the middle. So the Department of War was wanting them to agree to AI making the decision to kill and also pulling the trigger without alerting a human. And that's where Anthropic balked. So sounds like there is some of that consideration going on, regardless of maybe what the government may have needed that one day that Sam Altman signed those contracts. But sounds like there is a little bit of that going on here. And maybe we have kind of realized that we need a human to review stuff.
Well, given the types of humans that go into politics and bureaucracies, they're sort of sociopathic, psychopathic nature. Yeah. I'm not sure the human is a safe option either.
That's a fair point. All right, let's move on to to the next one. A federal security fraud case just produced a ruling that should change how every person in this country thinks about AI. Bradley Hepner, the former chair of GWG Holdings, used Claude to draft legal strategy documents for his attorneys. Judge Jed Rakoff ordered them to turn them over. A federal judge just ruled they're closer to a postcard than private. So what do you think there? Do you think there's any overturning that in the future?
I don't know. That's an interesting ruling. I was just thinking about that case. Was it Korea, the gaming company? I think it's mentioned in the article where this guy, the CEO, had promised some massive reward, 150 million or something to this new game if they met unrealistic targets. They apparently met the targets, and then him being a very good CEO started talking to ChatGPT trying to get out of this promise.
Yeah.
Like a lot of CEOs, he probably did 50 different scenarios of why they're wrong, and then through some sort of doom loop convinced himself that they're wrong. And that was one of the examples where that ChatGPT record got called. Yeah. I believe it was ChatGPT.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Right? So it got called into court and it was used against him. Now that's interesting, right? You're not talking to an actual lawyer, so it's not privileged.
Yep.
If you handed it to your lawyer, there it gets maybe muddy. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that's an interesting aspect of this case.
Yeah, the muddied part that I read was if your attorney recommends you use it as a legal tool, then it could become under that umbrella of privilege. But just talking to an AI itself, AI can't be an attorney. So
I have a broader concern about privacy in general and I try to turn there's the mode where they use your input as training data.
Yeah.
I turn those off.
I
I
do
don't know
too.
if everybody's doing that, but you probably should if you're getting any kind of advice in the direction of the Korean CEO. But I think this is one area where Europeans, because I lived there for about 7, 8, 9 years, where they're much more cognizant of privacy.
Yeah.
And probably you're going to see more regulations over there. I wonder how they would come down. Because there's probably an expectation of privacy when you're using those that could be defined contractually. But a lot of times, if you have intent to commit a crime, that can be overruled, right? It can overrule the contract. I mean,
Yeah, my takeaway from this is your history, even if you hit the delete button, is probably living on a cloud somewhere, and it's
yeah.
not private. So just when you're talking to your AI boyfriends and girlfriends, just make sure it's not personal, too personal, I guess. I don't know. That's weird. All right, let's move on there to the Fortune report. Fortune came out with this report, and I think it's based on Anthropic numbers, but this is the amount of tasks that AI can perform right now today, right? So this I found, actually I saw this from a friend. A friend sent this to me, and people are kind of freaking out because this is the piece that's getting thrown around the internet. People are trading this around on Twitter, etc., and they're seeing that computer programmers, their job, 75% of it almost can be done by AI as it sits today. Customer
Man,
service
that's
representatives, 70%.
that's a cruel irony, right?
I mean,
The, pe-
the
the
people who
people,
made it. The people who made
people-
it are the most vulnerable. Yeah.
Hey, in every job I've ever had, they always tell you, it's this kind of folklore.
Yeah.
Do such a good job that your job becomes obsolete.
Well, it's like God, right? He made us in His image. So,
Yes.
but no. So the unfortunate part of this is that there's a second image in the same report that's showing the gap between where AI is now. If you look now, computer and math, AI is doing 35% of it today versus the theoretical 95%. So if this second image was shared as much as that first image, people would have a better understanding of
Context.
a better
Priors.
context. Yeah, what it can do is hypothetical. It's not doing that today yet, and it's not good enough to do it without oversight. It's just not. Same thing with the military. We're just not there where it's able to do it on its own at this point in time.
Hey, in that way, it mirrors humans, right? If every business you've ever worked for, if you reached your full potential, right,
Yeah.
you could do a hell of a lot more. There could be peace on earth, Jason, as well. We all just got along.
There could be. All right. Let's move on here to Elon Musk. And I have good news for everyone. Elon has once again stated in a tweet that AI/robotics will produce our goods and services at a far faster rate than ever before. We can all retire and collect our universal income checks. But I think I have a different theory. If companies actually lay off employees at this high of a rate, will that not in turn affect consumption? Who is Apple, for instance, going to sell their latest iPhones to if nobody's employed? If nobody has a job, who's going to be able to buy these iPhones? Universal income isn't here yet, not today, but layoffs are. Let's talk about, are these companies maybe shooting themselves in the foot by riffing their own customers?
We're going to talk about Stalin and collectivism and socialism a little bit later. You'll see the connection there when we get to that point. But I think it's a good point. Actually, an economist brought this up earlier, that if you have massive AI layoffs, then that will undermine the companies that are actually laying them off.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of assumptions packed in there, that those workers don't get another job. That's number one. And if AI is so transformational as a technology, like other technologies, there was worker displacement at the beginning, but they got rerouted into other jobs. Now, not one to one. Some people suffer and they never get, they don't get the next job. They don't retool, retrain. So there's an assumption there that if you get displaced, you'll never get another job because of AI. Now, I'm not a believer yet. I'm far away from that AI can do every job. It can't even do every job in corporate because half the work is politics. Half the work is managing people's personalities, people's psychologies. So it can't even do that, right? And then there's the gardener outside that people hire in the really nice neighborhoods. There are the power washers.
Yeah.
There are farming. There's all this stuff that you wonder, okay, it's a little bit utopian right now. But the logic of what you mentioned, I think that's a legitimate point. But it assumes, though, that those workers won't find other things to do. My great hope is, if this were true, it's not about the UBI receiving some, permanent government welfare or
Right.
capitalist welfare, whatever you want to call it in this
Yeah.
case. It's the idea that people like you and I who are creative, or my daughters who are creative, more on the artistic side, we're more on the music side, that we could spend more time on that stuff. That would be the great hope. And maybe you already see it in the creator economy. I don't think AI is going to displace that. Maybe it's even accentuated. Maybe more people go into making like Steinways,
Yeah.
carving, you know, art. Maybe art blooms because of that. We just don't know. And I think that goes back to the Allbirds versus Burry. People are speculating in wild ass directions.
Yeah, no, for sure. I actually read today that there was a new AI artist topping the Apple iTunes charts. I think they take them down as soon as they find out they're AI because it's like bad publicity, but I can't remember the name of that one. It was Nora something, I think. But it was just so there was another AI artist making waves.
Nora Jones.ai or
No.
Milli
No,
Vanilli.ai.
it was something strange. But no, but so, that's still happening where these are fully AI artists. I think there's going to be something cool happen when actual artists are using AIs to maybe create new sounds that weren't there before.
Exactly.
Or maybe,
Exactly.
using them to riff back and forth with lyrics and come up with cool lyrics. I don't know. There's a lot of applications for it to be used to enhance versus replace. And I think that's where our sweet spot's going to be. And I think that's where people are going to gravitate towards because they're going to know the mechanical versus not, at least for now. I don't know. Maybe in the future they won't.
Hey, one wish I would have because of learning piano.
Yeah.
I'm one of these people who, because I have this creative streak, I'm ADD. I'm all over the place. So I'll start like on a piano track and I'll get through like a few Bach songs. And ultimately, I want to play like a Chopin song.
Mm-hmm.
But then I grab a blues book and I get distracted for a month. And then I get another song I heard on the radio. I download an app and do that. What my wish would be for developers, I could just say to the AI, like a pedagogical AI, I want to learn this Chopin song. And you don't just learn it right off the bat, right? Give me the path. What are all the pieces that I need to learn and skills to be able to pull that off? That's where I think AI has some promise because doing that with books, one, it's expensive and it's just hard to follow and keep motivated, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a cool use for it. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that'd be really cool. I'm using it for my own learning purposes, basically, to help me learn faster and digest information quicker. Or if there's something that I don't fully understand, like, one of our topics tonight is on SPACs. There's a lot of terminology, financial terminology that I didn't know before a couple days ago. and I used AI to help me learn it. It's just, if there's a term you don't know, you can very quickly, and I think even as we move forward into like the Meta Ray-Bans and stuff like that, as that gets kind of upgraded and down the road a bit, I think we'll have even more instant access to, maybe my AI knows I don't know that word because it knows me really well. And it's going to feed me a definition of it when someone says it.
Yeah, enhance your thinking, not replace it. That's what you want to use it for. And same thing. I mean, there are always topics where humans, our brains are limited, our capacity, the knowledge is almost infinite these days. That's one of the good uses of it to help you learn things, but be careful when you're doing it. Just make sure you're questioning it. Make the AI search. I've talked about this many times. Whenever it's giving you information, double check, search. So many times Claude, because Claude is my favorite, I admit that. It'll tell me something confidently. We spend like 30 minutes developing the idea, and then I say, go search. And Claude's like, oh, I got to be honest with you. I was only using my training data, and there's actually a company that does the very idea you're looking at. Well, damn. So that was my fault because I should have known better. But I think this is like a public service message that we should always accentuate on this show is just people be careful when you're using these things.
Yeah, it is not 100% foolproof, and I think it's going to be a long time before it is. Okay, let's move on to our main topic tonight, and that is Stanford's 2026 AI Index Report.
Yeah.
This is the HAI AI Index Report. It's the most comprehensive annual snapshot of where artificial intelligence actually stands, covering everything from technical benchmarks to investment dollars to public opinion across 30 countries. This year's edition finds AI moving decisively from lab curiosity to real-world deployment, with frontier models now performing at expert human level on medical diagnosis, mathematical reasoning, and of course, software engineering tasks. The big tension in this report surfaces is that AI capability is advancing faster than our ability to govern it, and the public is significantly more anxious about that gap than experts building the technology.
Yeah, that's clear on any social media platform. I mean, that's true. Like the advancements are fast while you're looking that up. But at the same time, they can't count letters in a word. They can't tell time,
Yeah,
for example, right?
exactly.
One thing I want to jump into before we even read this is one of those things where I will start talking about fatal abstractions. What I'm always wondering, I didn't get a chance to read the whole report, which I need to do, but what are we actually talking about when we're talking about AI? And it seems we're often just talking about large language models.
Yeah.
So that's something we need to be clear on. But AI itself covers a wide swath, right, of subdomains.
Yeah.
We just need to be aware of that because that term gets thrown around so much that it's become branded. So the people that have fear, they have fear of the abstract term and not of a specific application.
Yeah,
and that's horrible marketing, right?
Yeah.
Like we should be clear what we mean. It's easy to slip into that because they're using AI like they use Google, right? Like you just throw Google around, Google the thing. It's become a search term.
Yeah. Well,
AI's
people overlook the fact that AI has been around for a while. Like, we've had rudimentary AI for quite a long time. And, these algorithms that have been around for years feeding you
right.
Facebook media, that kind of stuff. That's AI. It's AI. It's just a little bit more rudimentary than the LLMs. Okay. So let's get into this report. I think there's 12 points here that we're going to kind of dig into just a little bit, but let's look at the most power hungry models. What do you see any trends here? I mean, there's obviously a pretty much up and to the right line from year to year, right?
I see Grok at the top right. Is that right?
Yeah, Grok 3.
I guess it takes a lot of power to tell the truth, right? that's the positioning anyway.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah. And then
I mean, the open source models up there, that's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they all take a lot of power, right? They're all pretty power hungry is the point you would take away. And
Yeah.
I know on my Opus 4.7, it's already warning me, you should try it, but by using it, your usage limits will be used up faster, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you will reach them faster. So
I noticed on like even Sonnet if you just chat with Claude today, it now instead of says, it used to say you could either choose between not extended or extended, and now it says adaptive ever since the new release came out.
Yeah.
So Sonnet's adaptive.
Well, there's kind of like this conspiracy theory out there, and sometimes the way Claude is behaving, it makes you think maybe there's something to it. People are saying that it's shortening its messages, telling you you're done with your idea before you're actually done with it.
Yeah.
And I've had that happen to me where it's a little bit strange. Like, dude, you're being rude, man. Claude, chill out, right? Like, I'm not done with my idea. And I swear the other day it was, I'm a night bird, or night owl, right? So around 1:00, you're done. Basically is what it said. You need to go to bed. That's what it told me, literally. Yeah. So I think people get suspicious because they know, we talked about this last week about Claude Mythos. One of the theories why it didn't come out is because they don't have enough compute. And are they training it to save power? I don't know, but there's a hell of a business incentive to do that.
Well, I told it to read this Stanford report, which is about 400 pages. And it read 20 pages. It gave me a report and it said, it gave me a summary of the first chapter. So I immediately go, did you read the whole thing, Claude? And it goes, no, I only read the first 20 pages. Let me do the rest now.
Oh, that's another failure mode, by the way. When you give it like I used to work on my books with it, read the whole book, give me some pointers, areas where it could be better. It doesn't read the whole thing. It just kind of extrapolates from one chapter. Like, damn, am I such a bad writer that after one chapter, you know the whole book? But right. That's another one of those confabulating things, right? Where it's telling you it's doing something, it's going through the motions, and it's in that gray text, that light gray text where it's like spinning the wheels, like it's doing something, but it's not. So it's basically like a corporate worker that sits at its desk. The person sits at the screen, stares at the screen, and the whole game is to look busy, but not actually be doing anything for 8 hours.
It's a good point. It is remarkable how well these things are mimicking human behavior.
AGI is here. See, it's already here. It lies. It's lazy.
So here's an interesting one. This is the China-U.S. lead evaporates is the title of this slide here. And this is just showing that the pink line here is China's progress in AI, powerful AI. And I don't really know. They're saying this is an ELO-like score, which is like a chess That's how you measure chess champions, is ELO. So they're saying this is the ELO for China, and this is the ELO for the US, and we have now pretty much.
Where's Magnus? Magnus is at the top right.
Yeah, he's Swedish, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think they're on this chart yet, but he'd be.
They don't need one. They got Magnus.
That's right. He's making all their decisions, big brain. Yeah. So this is interesting, and I want you to keep this in mind for later when we come to the amount of money spent slide. So this coupled with that slide is pretty telling. So this is called America's draw fades. And what this is talking about is the influx to these countries of researchers and developers for AI specifically. So if you'll go down here, the United States was by far the most desirable place to be to study AI or research and develop it until just very recently. We have now plummeted. Nobody seems to want to come here anymore. I don't know why.
Well, let's read that properly. I want to make sure I'm understanding it properly. Yeah. Is that newcomers every year?
I believe so.
Because you could read that as it's saturated. They're already all here.
Yeah, let's see. The U.S. is home to the most AI researchers and developers of any country by far, but the flow of these experts into the country is dramatically slowing. The number of AI scholars moving to the United States has dropped 89% since 2017.
Yeah. But see, this is a good example of graphs being misleading.
Yeah.
Because you might take that to be like, oh, they're all leaving. No, this is like Congress telling you it's cutting spending, right? When they tell you they're cutting spending, they're cutting the rate of increase. So it looks like spending dropped off a cliff, but no.
That's a good point.
They just slowed the rate of increase. And that could be bad or good, right? I don't know how to interpret that. This is priors again. Do I interpret that as we're no longer attractive, or are we just saturated? There are no more jobs. I find that hard to believe, by the way. There are no more jobs because they're hiring like crazy, which is ironic because these foundation labs are screaming AI is going to take all the jobs, yet they're hiring like crazy.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
So let me just lay this out here. So India has a negative 16.92. That's their rate, is negative 16.92. And then the next highest outside the U.S. is 5.17 in the U.K. But we're still 26. Like we're still monstrous compared to all those. So yeah.
Yeah. See the vertical axis changed.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, these aren't the same. Absolutely. That's a good catch. Good catch. Think back to that slide where China's really close to us on how powerful their models are, and then look at where their spending is on this one. This is the AI investment surge. This is the countries with the most investing dollars. Obviously, the United States are way out in front. How do you take that?
It's not military spending.
No. Yeah, right. No, this is private investment.
I think it's also structural too. What I'd be curious about, it's not here, is are they including government dollars in investment, or is this private investment?
No, this is specifically private, it says.
Yeah, so that's VC. I mean, America's known for having a war chest when it comes to VC.
Yeah.
I wonder how much, research investment there is from the governments there. That's something I would want to look at. And since they're going at an open source, you can think of it like this. This is that trickle-down effect. America goes out, takes all the risk, spends all the money, does the development, and then the technology trickles out. Now, some people will say they're stealing it. Regardless, this happens no matter what anyway, because these labs, one of the things that happens, their best employees leave. Why did they leave? Well, they probably have a low chance of moving up at that company, and they're being poached, which is I think most individuals can understand that. If somebody comes in, puts a pile of cash in front of you, you can go out and, start your own company. That's how Anthropic started, basically, right?
Yeah.
And this is happening over and over and over. So that's one of the ways that even though America's spending all that money, IP leaks, knowledge leaks, because companies have a very hard time holding it.
Yeah.
I know that's probably not where you thought we'd go with that, but that's one of the thoughts I had is, why aren't we seeing that lead? It could be because the charts are only looking at a specific thing. Like you showed there, they're looking at that ELO model, I think you said.
Yeah.
There are other criteria by which you judge how close they are to each other. There are economists out there that say, actually, America's really far ahead.
Right.
It just depends on the test.
Well, we've made it really hard for China. Well, not impossible, but hard for China to get the good chips, the good from NVIDIA, because those are made in Taiwan, TSMC, right next door to China, but they can't be sold to China. We've got an embargo on them.
It could backfire if China learns another way to reach the same results cheaper.
Well, so I was reading this paragraph here
Yeah.
while you were talking, and this does state that the Chinese government channels resources through government guidance funds, because again, this is a private only, it's not looking at public money. And it's saying that China between 2000 and 2023, it's invested 912 billion into these funds, but it's across multiple industries, including AI.
Yeah.
So including government investment, AI in China could be as high as the United States. It's unclear. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it's unclear. It's not the most transparent regime over there.
Yeah, but that's a good caveat. And again, the graph is a little bit misleading. Entry level squeeze. So this is normalized headcount trends by age group for software developers and customer service segments. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. This is our people getting replaced by AI right here. So early career, we're going to be looking at this dark blue color, which I believe is this, and then this line here. So these are the two early career lines. And they're definitely declining where everyone else is actually on the rise for both software developers and customer support. But you can see here, software developers, I've been talking about this, junior software engineers those jobs are just really hard to come by for newly graduated people. Like, why would you hire them right now when you don't know if AI can just do it and you can have a senior guy look at it all? So that's really, really telling. Yeah. All right, let's move on to now feelings on AI. Frenemies? An interesting title, but this does have some interesting data in it right here. So the global expectations for AI are in blue here. You're going to see this is create new jobs and new ways of working versus the pink, which is eliminate jobs and disrupt industries. Okay. So the global consensus is that half and half, that it's going to create new jobs and ways of working. And it's also half of the people who are saying it's going to eliminate jobs and disrupt industries. Now, my question is, why is the United States the most heavily invested, the most progressed AI nation, and we are way down here where we think very much so in the majority that we're going to eliminate jobs and disrupt industries? Is that because we have more foresight or we have more knowledge about it, so therefore, or is it being marketed incorrectly?
That could be yes. So what I would say is, let me give you an analogy. When I was in Germany, I lived there 7 years. And the whole time people were running around saying American companies do not respect European privacy. They don't value our privacy. And everybody's saying this while holding a Google phone, while using Google Maps. It reminds me of this story when I was in Russia. This guy ran up to me while we were eating in a McDonald's, of course, because we're Americans. And this Russian looked at me in Russian and said, "I hate Americans." And I look at the guy. He has a McDonald's. He's in McDonald's, first of all, right? Nike hat on, Levi's jeans on, Nike shoes. You're like, what the hell, dude? So my point of saying those two brief stories was, or telling those two brief stories was simply that there's often a dichotomy between what people say and what they do. Americans, I find it interesting that they're the least optimistic when it comes to creating jobs. That goes to the point of the marketing has been constantly, and this is what's interesting. This is one of my favorite authors of all time is Anton Chekhov. And he used to write these stories where people say the exact same thing, but mean totally different things by them.
Yeah.
So imagine this. Somebody sitting more in the tech bro territory is saying AI is going to take all the jobs. They're seeing that as positive. They're like, yes, the UBI that Elon is talking about, that's coming, right? This is going to be a post-scarcity world.
Yeah.
In a year, nobody's going to be working. Everything is cool. I'm ready to lose my job. Let's say you sit maybe a little bit to the left, right? You hear AI is going to take all the jobs, and your heart goes out to all those people losing jobs. And then that goes back to your point earlier of, well, what happens to those people if they lose jobs? Will there be a UBI yet? Will there actually be such abundance yet? Or are they going to be on the public dole? There's going to be a lot of displacement and mental health problems and substance abuse that comes with that. I don't know is the answer. That was a long way of saying that when you get to public sentiment, the behavior often departs from the actual words. And so I think that's a good example of show your priors. Revealed preference comes when people do the behavior. And probably if you looked at adoption, the US is ahead on Gen AI adoption. So that's a disconnect. So they're using it, but have a sort of mixed sentiment about it.
Yeah. It's interesting.
The Nigeria one is what I find fascinating. I traveled to Africa. I don't know if I told you that. But the amount of entrepreneurial spirit over there. And people just really willing to run against walls, super technical. They're way ahead on like financial applications, fintech, etc. And that's interesting because they see it as an absolute opportunity because for them, they might be able to leapfrog Europe, who's putting kind of the brakes on.
Yeah.
I think the reason people freak out about that United States number is they're thinking, oh my God, we're going to lose. But if you
Yeah.
go back to that chart earlier, it might be because we're already ahead by so much. I don't know.
It's a good point. I mean, it could be a look at, you know, AI kind of will level the playing fields for countries, and the U.S. has been in the lead of the world order for quite a while. So, you know,
Yeah. Well, at
that
least
could
there
be.
may be some niche applications where certain companies or countries can dominate and specialize. That's what economics is all about, specialization and trade, right? So,
Absolutely. All right, let's look at adoption rates here. So, generative AI more popular than the internet, and this is just adoption rates for technologies over time. I think right now the stat is it's right here. AI has reached 53% population adoption. I think that's globally within 3 years, which is faster than the personal computer or the internet. Though the pace varies
yeah,
by country and correlates with strongly the GDP per capita.
everybody's negative about it, but using it. That's what we were kind of talking about it. I don't know what they're using it for, right? This is always the question on these stats. Are they using it for their personal assistant, a personal partner? What are they using it for?
Yeah.
They're using it for productivity, or are they using it like a time sink? I have no idea, but it's interesting. Again, these graphs, you don't know how are you supposed to interpret them when it comes to the economy or to business models. If I'm a startup, how do I interpret this? Does that mean it's good or is it bad? I don't know.
I don't know. I was on my boyfriend is a AI subreddit today. Interesting slice of life. I'll tell you that. Okay. The self-education wave. This is high school students Gen AI uses for schoolwork. So you'll see most of them are conducting research and finding resources, or editing and revising essays, brainstorming ideas. And then we also have explaining complex topics, learning languages, and writing code, and then other. But I mean, that lines up with what I would expect. I mean, that's kind of what I use it for with work. Is I help it it helps me do research and finding sources, and it helps me rewrite emails. I mean, that's what I
Well,
use it for.
you have this debate, right? And it's not a debate among the kids. The kids are using it left and right because it's helpful.
Yeah,
And let's be honest, my parents are both teachers. Not every teacher is gifted at teaching things. Or they have big classes and they can't explain it very well because they're
yeah,
distracted. There are all kinds of reasons why some students may not get the point. Now with AI, they can go home and get it faster, provided it's telling the truth, right? And facts and the right, they're using the right resources. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you look at it. The kids are adopting this faster. They tend to adopt technology faster, it
yeah.
seems like.
Well, I think it was
TikTok
part of
caught
this
them, right?
larger study, and they found
Yeah.
that the quality of the output you get is heavily dependent upon the quality of input.
Yeah.
So someone in a very highly expert, like I think biochem was the field that they were referencing. If you're an expert in biochem and you're prompting AI to help you in biochem related, you're going to get really high quality results. Whereas if I was asking AI about biochem, my results are going to be pretty poor.
Of course.
So
So
that has a lot to do with it too.
prompting is the skill, right? So it's the new coding
Yeah.
skill. And
So
that means maybe people who are verbally gifted or domain experts will have an advantage when prompting,
yeah.
provided they have some mental model of how AI works.
Well, you also have to have the expertise in that specific field that you're wanting to
Exactly.
know to
Exactly. You need
put it in the
both.
context. Yeah. Because it
You need
won't just
both.
automatically go to it unless you provide some more extra context to it. Anyways, I thought that was pretty fascinating. So AI is your doctor's assistants. The number of publications on medical, so this is publications on digital twins. Digital twins are essentially, there's going to be an atomically correct twin of yourself that's in the computer, and they can run Sims on it, stuff like that. At least I think that's my understanding of it. There's digital
So
twins.
also going bald, slightly
you know, yeah, they can
overweight.
find out what's going to happen based on your genetics, basically.
Yeah.
It all comes down to the AI is able to decode protein molecules and DNA, RNA, that type of stuff at a level that's just
Yeah.
superhuman. And that's just the way that's going to be on that one. All right, there's one more thing I want to look at here that's kind of interesting, and that's the global distribution of data centers. And as you can see here, the dark blue is the heaviest amount of data centers, and the light blue or white is either no data available or very little. So you will notice that the biggest concentration of AI data centers, I'm sorry, this is just data centers, is the United States of America by far.
Like
Then followed by
5,000
China.
plus, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's easily over 1,000 for sure.
Yeah, in Europe, it looks like Germany, and you have the UK.
Yeah.
Looks like some stuff going on in Australia. So
Yeah.
interesting.
It's us, China,
The
and
narrative,
Germany, basically.
and then you wonder always the narrative out there, right? That falling behind, China's going to win. And you look at the spend, the private investment spend, you look at the actual number of data centers. Now, the place we talked about earlier, where China may have the advantage, is going much more heavily into state-directed power construction.
Yeah.
So putting up lots of nuclear power plants, using coal, burning it like crazy. And that's where we came to the idea of putting data centers in space, right? So you could use pure solar energy. But it's always good, I think, to look at these charts, but be careful and think about the priors. What's actually the assumptions behind them? And what is the argument actually being made? Is there an argument, or is it just pure facts? And relate it to your own situation. Like, are you trying to do a startup? Are you in a corporation trying to figure out what to do in strategy? Are you in government? It's not always clear. You read it differently depending on your priors, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely do. Okay. And that's a very interesting report. Again, it's very long, so I suggest you go read it, take a look at it, just thumb through. It's got some really cool graphs, and it's laid out really well, so you can quickly find something that's probably interesting to you specifically. But definitely check it out. Then again, that's the Stanford AI Index report for 2026. All right, let's move on to the SPAC boom of 2020 and 2021 was one of the greatest transfers of wealth from retail investors to Wall Street insiders in recent memory. Now, in late 2025 and 2026, the market for SPACs is back. And the man who arguably embodied that era more than anyone, Chamath Palihapitiya, you may know him from an All In podcast, or he was an OG guy at Facebook who made a lot of money on their initial stock offering. He has just raised $300 million to do it again. So the question is, has anything actually changed, or are we just running the same play with better PR? Mike, would you explain to us what a SPAC is?
Oh, thanks for throwing that over to me.
I can
Right?
do it. I mean,
Well, it's a special, you can think of it like a special purpose vehicle,
yeah,
because you take it as it's a pile of cash that you do an IPO with, right? And then what you do with that pile of cash is you then invest it in a private company or buy the private company. So it becomes like a merger.
yep,
And then that allows that private company to go through a sort of shadow IPO much faster than they could have the traditional IPO route. So it's like an end around the traditional IPO route could be 6-12 months or longer for a traditional IPO, 12 to 24 months. For this, it could happen in 6 to 12 months, so much faster. And to be honest, private companies, some of them, they need capital, right? They're hungry for it, but it's very difficult to do the traditional IPO. So that's like a value proposition for them, is to go through the SPAC to get access to the capital.
yeah. What happened in the 2021, 2022 era is that these were really popular. And the theory is because that investment capital was low, liquidity was low. And so they needed to come up with a different way and introduced SPACs here, which is a neat way of getting a company to be public quickly. And it hasn't panned out too well. We're singling out Chamath because he's a public figure, he's well known, and he's got a terrible record with these things.
But hold
he's
on.
doing it again.
But let's be careful.
Yeah.
When we say it hasn't worked out too well, for whom? Because that's the point. That's where the controversy comes.
Yeah.
Chamath has done well, right? The question is, I think there are several angles. How did the post-merger companies do? And actually, post-merger companies don't do well in general.
Yeah.
And if you are already struggling for capital, then you might have problems with your business model. It might not be ready to scale. What is it going to do with all that cash? So they tend to underperform. So the thesis from day one as a prior of probably not going to work out as well as we think before we do the merger, right?
Yep.
So then the retail investors would suffer from that. While, and this is where the controversy comes from in SPACs, the founders of the SPAC legally can do like 25K up front, raise about 300 million, and they get like 20% of the post-merger shares. So they have a heavy incentive to do any deal. And this is the criticism, right? That doing a deal is better than returning the money to the shareholders because it's held in a trust,
Yeah.
right? So once they collect the cash, it's held in a trust. And if the investors don't like the private target that they want to make a merger with, then they're free to leave, right? So those are kind of the mechanics. And there may be a structural problem there where there's just an incentive. This is a critique for the founders, the Chamaths of the world, to push to any deal because they're going to bank. As long as it goes to a post-merger, and usually there's some vesting. And to be fair to him, I'll tell you what he was trying to do. They usually have a vesting period. I don't know, you can correct me, but about a year. So all the merger has to do is survive for a year. And the whole trick is that once that 20% has converted of the founders to common stock, it's liquid. And they can sell it and bank big time. And they have. Chamath, I think to his credit, he was trying to say, but let's give it a stock performance like warrants, right? So if it's 50%, 75%, 100%, and the idea was there that it would only vest one third, one third, one third, then those retail investors presumably would also benefit because the stock improved,
Yeah.
right? But again, over what time period? Because if I can get it up 100% on pure hype, like an Allbirds, let's say Allbirds was one of them, it's not, but if it were, and I just attach AI and I say, hey, post merger, we're still working out the integration and working on the business model. After a year, maybe people are still bought in, the stock rises and rises and rises. And then you can cash out before it collapses, if it's going to collapse, right? So
Yeah.
it's really an interesting model. I was not so aware of it. On the one hand, there's the benefit for the private company to get access to public money. On the other hand, so that could be a benefit, but on the other hand, the structure of it tends to favor the founders of the SPAC, and it's not clear how retail investors can benefit, and it looks like they've lost mostly. That's the controversy. But again, this is an innovative model. I wonder if there are innovations on it that can improve it, but it's probably going to get regulated even more than it already has
Yeah.
because of that.
Probably. I mean, I would say, a number of things apply here. So if you're looking at it from a VC point of view, you would probably say that, well, we've got a big failure rate, but the ones that do succeed, they succeed really big and it makes up for it, right? So maybe,
Or, and this is the game, you exit it before it's clear that the bit. So, what is success? This is the whole point.
that's true. Yeah.
Success for a VC is often just the exit. If I
Yep.
get the exit, somebody bought it. Either you go to IPO or you go to M&A to a corporate.
Yeah.
Somebody bought it, you exit. That does not mean that that business will become a successful business model.
Yeah.
So it always comes back to how do you define success and for whom? And that's where the controversy lies here.
Yeah. Well, let's look at how, I would define failure for investors. Let's say
This
Virgin
is the
Galactic.
this is the classic example, right?
This is Virgin Galactic Holdings. So this was SPAC 1, I believe, for Chamath and his social capital, their firm. They merged with Virgin Galactic here at the end of 2019, to my recollection. It did spike up, good for them, but then it has never, ever reached that point again. So for anyone who was in the long hold here and didn't sell when the rug was getting pulled out, they're just hosed. They're never going to recoup that difference, right? So if you didn't get out at the right time and you're not an insider, then you're getting hosed. And that's pretty much what you see with a lot of this stuff. And really, IPOs these days are overvalued almost all the time. Like there's very few IPOs that do well.
Well, if you wanted to be cynical, the people running the SPACs are obviously sophisticated.
Yes.
They probably
Yeah.
are, right? It's not like they don't know the probability of a post-merger success.
Yeah.
This will be my critique, right? These are smart people.
Yeah.
They also know when their stuff vests. So they have an incentive to make sure that the narrative supports the stock rising, releasing announcements, etc. But when it vests, they're free. But I'm not going to accuse anybody of anything, but I like to look at the structures because the structures of these deals help you predict what the behavior might be, and the problem might be in the structure. And because when I was looking into it, it's not so easy to understand on first sight. So if you're a retail investor, how many of them really know that their money's going into this or understand the vehicle? I don't know. I don't
No.
know the answer, but that's why the Romans always said "caveat emptor," right? Like, be
Well,
careful what you're buying.
if I'm a successful businessman and one of the OG vice presidents of Facebook who made a lot of money on that initial offering and has done, has created his own firm, he's essentially a billionaire in his own right today, comes to me with this great idea, I'm going to buy into it. It's too complicated for me to understand. This is a lot of my problem with Wall Street and financial insiders is that it's not super difficult concepts, but it's packaged in language that's confusing. It just ends up being this really complex terminology, and it's just packaged to be
Look,
confusing and elite.
there's also
That's the whole
another
thing.
mechanism. The other mechanism you're describing there is there's a lot of investment based purely on social proof. Because that Facebook person was successful one time, survivorship bias kicks in, means they must know what they're doing with every other investment, but that's not the way probabilities work.
Yeah.
It does not mean that they know what's coming next. And you see this behavior among investors. Investors are supposed to be contrarians, take risks on the unknowns, the founder that believes everything, yet they won't talk to you unless they got a warm intro from somebody who already has social proof, right? So what you got to be aware of as an investor, and I'm not blaming the game, right? That's the game. It always has been. It always will be. We trust people that we know and that have credibility. Be careful though, right? That it's not only social proof. Still, you got to do your due diligence. You got to understand the vehicles. You got to understand the underlying business model that you're buying into. You got to know the probability in this vehicle that post mergers simply don't return the value over the long run. Doesn't mean this one won't, but in general, on the average, they don't, right? That's the point.
Based on the social interactions, you might get referred into something, and your buddy might say, I know this guy who's just making a lot of money from my friend Bernie Madoff. You got to meet him.
Yeah.
And you're going to get into
Yeah.
some Ponzi scheme. Like it can happen. It can really happen. And these
Well,
things,
and if you got in when that thing's going up, you get immediate feedback that, oh, that was the right move.
you do. Yeah. If you get on the high
Again,
end of the Ponzi scheme. Yeah.
next greater fool theory.
Yeah.
If you're on the upswing, as long as there's some other fool who's also not doing due diligence, who buys it when you exit, you won. Whose fault is that, right? Because a lot of I've seen some investors say, "Well, look, you should have diversified, right? This is part of the game. You put risk capital in. Maybe you can write it off on your taxes." But it comes off kind of like the famous quote, "Let them eat cake,"
Yeah.
Like, because you're in the Versailles Palace, you can tell the peasants out there, while you banked on 30, 40 million on the deal, they may have lost their life savings. That doesn't help them. Let them eat cake. They don't have cake. They got barely bread now.
Well, there's this bro culture that
Marie Antoinette, yeah.
glorifies bad behavior in a way. It glorifies, making the money at whatever the cost is, what are the consequences. As long as you're making the money, you're doing right, doing well. So, maybe it is that customer's fault that he should have known those beans weren't going to turn into a magic beanstalk, right? Like I don't know. It's repackaged
Well, I
snake
think
oil. It's sophisticated, but it's still
But snake oil implies that it's not their philosophy, right? If their philosophy is, hey, this is the game we're in, it's a game of probabilities, and that's the only game they've known. They go into it with the mindset, I might get burned. The difference is, though, they already have the capital.
Yeah.
So they can play that game. And if they lose, they can jump on the next horse. The person with a little capital can't play that game, right? They got to be careful about which games they play. So I think it has become a part of the whole culture and philosophy and ethics, even that to normal people it looks like snake oil, but we don't know what's really going on inside their heads philosophically. Do they really see it that way, or do they actually believe in this game? Or do they know? Do they know, hey, post mergers mostly don't work, so we got to get out when it gets to the high point? We have to guess, right? So I don't know, man. There's a lot of gray area there. What I encourage everyone to do, educate yourself.
This shape reminds me of what we see now in these meme coin rug pulls. So let's say Melania coin, it got rug pulled. The president of Argentina had a meme coin, it got rug pulled. So what that means is that inside investors are taking early positions before it's publicized. So they buy early, number one. Number two, there's also a liquidity backing meme coins. So there's actually like a Solara or a Bitcoin currency underneath it, like providing liquidity. And so these people who set up the coins will literally just pull out the liquidity. And so the entire bottom falls out of the meme coin, which happened with Melania and again, the president of Argentina's meme coin. And it's a rug pull.
Hey,
And so only the insiders are making money, and there's no shot. No
well,
shot for anyone on the outside to make money.
if you wanted to go full on conspiratorial, for a while there, every time Anthropic announced a new capability, you would get this, the same chart. And
That's
how
true.
many of those people, how many other people knew that announcement was coming? I would love for some finance professors, researchers to look at that because we see this in corporates and in Congress, both, that before major announcements come, you see trades,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Right? There's the Pelosi, what is it called?
Pelosi
Pelosi
effect.
put?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Pelosi effect, right? Well, she's just one. They're all doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's natural, right? It's natural to have that temptation. I don't know if it's actually happening. You saw it in the PayPal chart with Burry, right? Same thing. What of that is just the market overreacting? What of it is, hey, it was always going to crash back down because the fundamental value is where it ended up.
Right.
I don't know.
Well,
Difficult.
that's interesting. Stay away from SPACs would be my suggestion. Stay away from financial vehicles unless you know a lot about them and know exactly what you're getting into. My suggestion is go index funds. They're boring and they're easy, and you're going to get probably what you expect. Anyways, that's my 2 seconds of preaching. Let's move on to our final topic of the evening, and that is a sweetheart guy. No. It's a guy named Joseph Stalin, a very controversial figure in history. And Mike, you're going to tell us a little bit how he might relate to business strategy and maybe a 5-year plan, something like that.
Yeah. Hold on with me as I go through this because people will presumably react strongly to this story. But I'm going to make the connection between promises, the causes of the world in those promises, and then the people on the ground who have to execute those promises. So we're going to relate to the 5-year plan. But I want to give you a little bit of the backstory of what was going on, the context when Joseph Stalin came to power. So he came to power in the Soviet Union, and they had sort of this Marxist, Leninist philosophy, methodology. And the idea of Marxism was what? It's a deterministic historical process where you can go from feudalism to capitalism to socialism and then ultimately to communism. The problem with Russia at the time when Stalin came in was it was barely getting out of feudalism. And so they believed, and this was part of the debate between Trotsky and Lenin and then ultimately Stalin, that you could leapfrog the sort of capitalist industrialist stage and get straight to socialism. And you needed this avant-garde leadership to do that with the scientific knowledge of how the currents of history develop. And the way they would do that was in these set of 5-year plans. And they did develop a lot. Literacy went up, right? They got factories everywhere. But they had a persistent problem of the 5-year plan not actually being met, right? And so the whole idea was, and this is where we look at univariate causes, when the avant-garde leadership says this is scientific, these 5-year plans, what is the explanation when you don't meet them?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I don't know. You get tossed off a bridge.
You get tossed off a bridge. And we're going to come to the meme because this story is going to lead up to that very picture. Well, because socialism is scientifically correct and you're going to jump to it, and the 5-year plan is the step, you're going to do it stepwise, right? You're going to reach it. They had a pre-planned list of people and a causal model that said, if you don't reach the plan, it's because you're not committed. You didn't execute the plan. Maybe there are spies. Maybe you're kulaks. Maybe you're later Jews, right? So they had this whole list pre-planned so that if the plan was not met, they would do what with these people?
Vanish.
They would vanish them. And the most famous one was a guy named Nikolai Yezhov. Before the plan was even going, he's the guy on the right. Nikolai Yezhov was the head of the NKVD. And they had a pre-plan to arrest something like 220,000 people and to find those guilty by definition, because they were in the group of people that were by definition sabotaging, undermining Soviet progress. And then there were 76,000 that were to be executed. So they already had their pre-planned headcount reductions from the very beginning when the plan was not met.
Yeah.
So the irony of the whole story here is that Yezhov put this system into place, executed it, right? Because the only explanation for not reaching the plan was a lack of commitment, a lack of execution, sabotage, spies, working with the United States, the capitalist powers. So you get rid of those people, you arrest them, and you execute them. He, ironically, later was executed by Beria. Beria is the very infamous NKVD guy who came in after. So an analogy in history is the Salem witch trials, where we predetermined that there were witches, right? And then we found them. Surprise, right? The Soviet Union, they predetermined that there were people undermining the plan, and they got rid of them. So what does this have to do with business? Have you ever done corporate budget planning or forecasting?
I've done forecasting, sure.
The way this thing works is your department typically will do a bottom-up budget, right? And you'll hedge,
Yeah.
right? At the same time, the leadership of the company is putting in a plan. Let's say in a market that grows 3%, we're going to grow 10%. And maybe now we have 8% EBIT, we're going to have 15 in 5 years. Right? So that's the overall plan. Then you're building your bottom up one. And what happens when you submit the plan?
You get less than you asked for.
You get less budget, but you get higher targets. Right?
Of course. Yeah.
It's called stretch targets, right?
Yep.
And what behavior does this unleash in the corporation? This is where the analogy starts to get haunting a little bit. That in corporate, that target is the truth. 10% growth, 15% EBIT. The numbers are the numbers. And if you're not hitting your numbers, no excuses. And that gets pushed all the way down the organization. And then what happens the rest of the year?
You got to enforce that.
You got to enforce that. And how do you enforce that? The people who are not hitting their numbers, they either have to, they get let go, right? Because the only explanation for not hitting the numbers in a corporate environment is what?
You're not doing it, or you're not trying.
You're not trying. Commitment,
Yeah.
right? It's not the fact that you set a 10% growth target in a 3% environment. It wasn't the case in the Soviet Union. Maybe it was the case that they had the wrong target, that they couldn't actually produce that much in 5 years because they just weren't there yet. Or, a drought happens. They don't have the technology. It didn't develop like they thought. Something happens in the world. So the point there is there's not only one variable when it comes to these targets. The world is a vast place. It's multivariate, right? So in corporate, it often is simply downward, you blame it on execution. What happens when they don't meet their targets? Strait of Hormuz, the Trump tariffs, right? Inflation.
This economy.
Yeah, exactly. It's the economy. It's outward which is closer to the truth. It's a multivariate world.
Yeah.
But downwards, they create, and I write about this in the book, and this is the pernicious effect of this mentality. If you assume a target is correct, then it's a deterministic management environment where everybody gets treated as though the only reason, as you said, you're not meeting targets is because you're not doing your job well. And I'm sorry, that's bullshit. The whole setup is bullshit because there can be many reasons that you don't reach your targets. Take the PayPal chart earlier. They dropped off a cliff. Did any one of their workers not perform the job well? No. It was AI hype. Probably the workers went back to work and did the same job they've always been doing. Stock crashes. Is that execution? No. And we talked about this earlier too. In such an environment, it's very difficult to tell the truth, right? Because if you come up with the truth, what does it sound like to leaders? You're making excuses.
Yeah.
Real leaders execute. They find a way to get it done, even if the target was wrong.
I can say it, as we're not in Stalin's government, I can leave. If I'm a talented salesperson, I can tell you from a sales perspective, there's going to be one guy in your org that's like the best, and he's going to be taken care of. Like he's going to get the good accounts.
Yeah.
He's going to be taken care of. But the number two salesperson's still really good and can have options. They're going to leave. They're going to be gone because they're not making the money that they feel they should because the opportunity isn't provided or there or easy, whatever. So it's really hard you can't just leave under Stalin. I can't just leave my country.
You can get airbrushed out of the picture.
Yeah, I can get erased from history.
Yeah, but it's not true for everyone.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's say you're 55-ish. You got a family you're putting through college. What's the probability somebody at that age is going to get rehired quickly?
Well, that's not that. Don't say that age at 55, 65. Let's say. Okay, fine.
No, it's difficult. It's difficult, and it depends on your position.
Yeah.
Right. And my bigger problem with it is, yeah, you can leave, but you shouldn't even have to leave. You shouldn't even have to go through this.
Yeah.
People wonder why there's not risk taking and innovation in corporations. And a lot of it has to do with this deterministic environment that's created where it's no excuses. You can only hit your numbers by any means necessary. But you can't control the whole world around you. So things happen in the world. That's not always your fault, right? And you have to take risks in an environment like that. When you take risks, it costs money. You're not going to hit your targets. So that's one of the major reasons that you don't see so much innovation, because people will keep asking, why aren't corporations using AI? Why aren't they innovating with AI? Well, one of the major reasons is they have these targets set that are strict, where they have to produce the cash, the revenue, right? And the present model is going to be squeezed to death to reach those targets. It takes a very, very courageous person in that environment to introduce AI in a new business model, which costs money, it's uncertain, it's risky, it probably won't produce the cash by the time that annual target hits. That was my long way of getting to why people ask me all the time, why aren't corporations innovating? Well, this is one mechanism, is that because they're governed by the annual P&L, it is extremely difficult, and it's understandable why those leaders don't take those risks. Innovation costs you EBIT. It costs you the target if you're wrong. And the payoff comes beyond the year. So you don't want to get airbrushed from your company. What do? You execute.
Get the
you
numbers.
do everything you got to hit the numbers by any means necessary.
Yeah.
So that also gives you some sense of why you're seeing AI layoffs. AI, I'll put it in quotes. It may have nothing to do with its cover. I have an EBIT target that I'm going to meet come hell or high water. AI is going to cover. And if we don't meet it, AI is also going to cover. Ooh, there's a lot of disruption on the market. You've seen the SaaS market. There are headwinds for businesses like ours, right?
It's
The
interesting to
analogy
me.
doesn't hold perfectly, right? I know people don't like to use like an example like Stalin, but the mechanism is similar.
Yeah,
Assume a truth that may not be true in the first place. The problem is the target, right? Not the actual world and the workers.
that's fair. I mean, you could use we could have used like maybe Bobby Knight, a basketball team.
Yes.
He
Yes.
all that matters is the results. You got to get me the results, and
Yeah.
this is my hard-nosed regime. Anyways,
But don't throw a chair at, your employees
I mean,
or the judges.
it, it definitely makes him a very imposing figure. So I find that stuff interesting. I really do, especially that I feel that pretty personally because just this past couple of years in my previous company, we've had some very unrealistic numbers come down the pipe,
All
and
companies.
it's crazy.
And you know what's crazy about that? This is the part that really gets to me. If you want to put a target on them at the top and you want to propose a project for them to implement, to change something, to innovate, they make you do so much damn research. Hire McKinsey, hire a Bain or KPMG or whoever to justify it.
Yep.
It takes a year to get a decision, if you ever get a decision. When you ask them the methodology for how they got that number, what is it? Pulled it right out of their asses. And it's simply something like we can do better. We
This will
can do
move
better.
our this will move our stock price. Yeah.
Yeah, we can both increase revenue at a rate we never have, and no one in the market is, and EBIT simultaneously. That is not easy to do. It's rare because it costs you money. We're an American culture. How do you make money? You got to spend money. You want to grow at that rate, it's gonna cost you EBIT unless you're Allbirds, right?
That's
So that's
very
just the
true.
stock price.
That's very true. Yeah.
No, but
Well,
new
benefit
markets
equity.
that are blowing up, that's possible. But in saturated markets where a lot of corporates are operating, hyper growth when you've never done it before and no one else is, and you put down these insane targets, you can only imagine the morale of that company. And that's not just corporations. That's also NGOs, that's government as well.
Yeah.
You get those environments.
Well,
Xerxes is whipping the sea, right? We can't control the sea. Sometimes the sea is the reason.
I'm hopeful for smaller companies to come along. It's just the nature of the beast. Like you grow a company to be so big and large that now it's just a behemoth piling along, doing what it's doing, and it's designed to keep making money and do it cost effectively, and it's been set up that way. And to change that it's a very tough and heavy lift. And that's just going to go. And it's just going to go that way until you've milked all the money out of it you can, and it's going to fizzle.
Yeah. And
It's going to get bought up.
the type of person that you attract in a system with so many layers of hierarchy and processes, they're usually political operators.
Yeah,
And
for
it's
sure.
very hard to attach accountability to them when they're sitting on the top. It's easier to attach accountability getting closer to the ground, to the projects. Although they're accountable, it's very difficult to remove them. Typically, the boards are reluctant to remove top leaders because that also has an effect on the stock price, usually, right? But one of the great hopes of AI, and I know a lot of the people out there, they're seen as too positive, too naive, is that we can extract people perhaps from those types of corporate environments where that 55-year-old person could now just leave and run their own business, right? And
Hmm.
the other thing that AI might be able to do, this is where I have great hope, is show what actually caused the failure. That means you have to look for it, right? So if it's something's wrong with our value proposition, your salespeople could be inputting that into a system that collects the information that surfaces it. If you have an AI looking out at the competitive environment that can do market intelligence on the fly, you can surface what's actually causing it. Right? So the days, I think, this is my great hope, the days of the bullshitters at the top that aren't held accountable because they can blame it on anything. Now you could possibly bring more transparency to what's happening from the bottom all the way up to the top and attribute what's going on to real causes, not just execution, not just commitment to the plan. Maybe something else really did get in the way.
So,
Maybe it's your bad projects that you put into place.
well, how about when, Tim Cook makes a bad decision, AI looks at it and says, well, your CEO made a bad call. And then Tim Cook bitches to Anthropic or OpenAI, whatever, says there's something wrong with your model. Like that's a lot of power, he's wielding to.
No, that's true. That's the counter argument to my side, is if that's possible. But what if the regulators hold the power, hold the model? What if your board actually does governance for once,
That's a weird
instead of
thought.
being just instead of just being golf buddies, and they actually use AI models that can test the strategic theses of the CEO in real time? What if they had to be accountable for their statements
Crazy,
and their theses?
crazy.
But one of the problems I have with the P&L is it's too abstract, right? Like 10% growth, 15% EBIT. That seems like very specific, but there's not one mention about the how. And the how is where your theses, your hypotheses have to come in and you test them.
Well, no, the how is your digital transformation, right? It's
That's right.
some buzzword is the how. Some
AI, productivity,
Yeah,
efficiency.
AI adoption is going to get us to an extra 10%. Why?
Yeah.
Why
Well,
wouldn't
we're doing an AI transformation right now.
it? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this year you're going to start seeing it.
I don't think.
And this is to investors. Again, back to investors and boards. Use AI to ask the questions like, what is the real how? And is it feasible?
Yeah,
Do you have the capabilities? Do you even have the business model? Do you have the customers? Do you have the channels? Do you have the distribution? Do you even have these revenue models? If you're selling hardware and you suddenly say we're going to make AI, do you have that capability?
maybe.
We're going to sell SaaS, but then we're going to make hardware. Those are conflicting business models, right? So this is what drives me insane is that at the buzzword level, everything sounds good. If you start drilling into it just a little, and this is where my hope that AI can do this, and this is the tool we're building, right? Like it can do it already.
Yeah,
It's getting there if it's deployed to the right causes. And I think this is a great cause to do it for, is these people are making multi-million dollars to spout out huge targets, insane targets that cannot be met, layering buzzwords over it, and it's hard to hold them accountable. We talked about this. There's got to be some innovation at the governance level. There just has to be.
yep.
We haven't innovated on our governance models really since the World War, post-World War, where everything was a widget.
Well, you
I'm
just
exaggerating, but
make
this
sure
is,
you save a spot on your board for whoever's going to bring in the most business. Like that's what it's for. It's an honorary position in a lot of
well,
regards.
and then there's the trade. Hey, I'll put you on my board, put me on yours.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I mean, and then there's director's insurance. So
Oh,
if you made a
directors.
bad decision, if you made a bad decision as a board director, you're covered. So for me, that's where there's some great hope is if we could innovate there at that board level to really start holding people accountable.
Yeah.
There's no other way. Because right now it's difficult. People down below get held accountable, but it's hard to hold accountable upwards because it's just so easy to play the game of abstraction.
Yeah. Well, everyone wants this year's bonus or, a short-term bonus, short-term
Yeah.
gain, and they're not paying attention to the long-term anymore just because the
But why
bonuses
should
are
you?
so
I mean,
big. They're so
but why
big and
should
so
you?
powerful.
Why should you? Like CEO terms are 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Just hold on, because that's a very human thing, right? You can empathize with them. I'm sitting at the top of this massive pyramid, 100,000, 200,000 employees. I don't have half the information I would need to make this thing work, not even close. I don't know if anything I'm doing is working, but I'm going to pretend right, as best I can. I'm going to cover it. I'm going to sell the story, the vision. And then when the bill comes due, I'm gone. And the good thing about when the bill comes due and I'm gone is you can just blame the new person. Right? Like, I'm not saying that's the mentality. It's just the structure again.
You mean we're going to be 2 years into the next CEO and they're still going to be talking about Biden?
Exactly. Well, it's so easy, right? It's so easy to do. And when you're, let's say you're the former one, hey man, everything was working when I was there. We were hitting our targets. We had a digital transformation going on.
Right.
We were testing new businesses. We were getting traction. New person comes, falls apart. Right? By the way, there's a good book called, I think it's called Power Game. It's about GE and that transition from Jack Welch to Emmett and the rest, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Very, very, very good book. And it talks about a lot of these dynamics, like managing earnings or not, speculative, and all of the power plays that go on in that kind of environment. What kind of leader do you need? And they were under massive pressure to hit their targets. So that comes from the market too, right? It's not just the behavior of
Right.
the top level. The market selects for that behavior. It's the incentives. Just like rolling it back all the way back to the SPACs.
Shell
It
company.
is what it is. But that was an innovation. I would like to see some innovation on the corporate structure side.
Well, we'll think about we'll ponder how to infect that change, and we'll get back to you.
And now you know who was disappeared in that picture. If
Was it
there's
Stalin?
anything you take from this whole session, maybe that was the useful thing. Trivia question.
All right. Well, very interesting, Mike. I appreciate the history talk, as always, in strategy. That'll do it for us tonight, unless you have anything else. All right. Have a good evening, everybody. I'm Jason. He's Michael. This is Show Your Priors. Give us a like. Give us a subscribe. Tell your friends. Tell your mom to come watch us every week. We're here every Tuesday, I think. And we have a Clips channel. You can catch us on Shorts. We're on TikTok. We're on lots of stuff. There's links in the description down below. Do your thing. Click around. Find us. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.